This PowerPoint is designed to review some common logical fallacies that we see, especially as they appeal or apply to advertising, just as a good example. A logical fallacy is an error in reasoning. It's kind of a fancy way to say that. It always undermines the logic of your argument, the strength of your persuasiveness. Generally, they lack evidence or support for the claim. And as you're thinking about these things as a student or as a writer, we want to avoid them in our own writing. We want to be able to identify them in other people's writing. So we're going to split these fallacies up into kind of emotional or pathos-based fallacies, ethos or credibility-based fallacies, and then logos or logic-based fallacies. So we'll start with pathos, emotional argument fallacies. One of the common ones we see here is either or. Either or is a fallacy that's reducing a complex issue to two choices. Either this will happen or this will happen. Either we do this or this other thing will happen. Politicians love to use this example. Either you vote for me or this terrible, horrible thing will happen. Most times, issues are much too complex for that. I like the MasterCard example here. There are some things money can't buy, for everything else there's MasterCard. You either have MasterCard or you're not going to be able to buy everything. This is where that boils down. Another logical fallacy is called the slippery slope. And this isn't necessarily how we use it in everyday speech or how you'll hear people use it. But we're going to think about it in terms of rhetoric and fallacies. So a slippery slope argument is saying that one thing, say step A, is going to lead to all of these other terrible things, step Z. So we're skipping all the steps in between. Today's tiny problem is going to turn into tomorrow's disaster, something like that. Usually it's working on scaring that emotion from your fear. This is a great example of it, this one. Gay marriage will lead to bestiality, just like how women voting led trans-choice voting. This is actually making fun of these types of arguments by saying, this one thing happens, this other terrible thing down the road is going to happen. Oftentimes, again, there's a lot of other steps in between that we have to take advantage of, or take into account. Overly sentimental appeals can also weaken our argument. We should all be kind of familiar with ASPCA ads or a lot of public service announcements do that. They're appealing to those tender emotions. Sometimes they're personal, individual. Oftentimes, they're going to rely on guilt. And sometimes that is not only off-putting for a reader, but it can ignore some of the deeper issues that are at stake by just appealing to those emotions. The last pathos-based fallacy is the bandwagon. And this one makes it seem like because everybody quote-unquote is doing it, you should do it too. So urge people to follow the same path everyone else has taken. Most issues are much too complex to boil it down that way, and just because most people are doing it, of course, because your mother's always told you, doesn't mean it's right. So this is a weak logical reasoning strategy. So in addition to some of those emotion-based fallacies, there's also some that appeal to ethical argument or credibility. Problems with our credibility that can undermine our persuasiveness. One of them is to appeal to a false authority. Certainly we see this a lot in advertising, right? Marilyn Monroe says, yes, I use Luster Cream Shampoo. She may not actually use Luster Cream Shampoo or may not have. So remember, just because there's a famous person in an ad doesn't mean that they have any qualification or ability to speak to that or to endorse it. Definitely, as a writer, you don't want to appeal to any false authority in your own writing. You always want to pick nice, strong authorities to appeal to. Another really popular false authority is the ad hominem. And what that kind of fallacy means is that you're attacking the person, not the idea. So saying something like, Harry Reid, the best friend an illegal alien ever had. As attacking him as a person, it's not necessarily saying anything about his immigration policy. A smarter approach is always to actually talk about what makes a policy weak rather than just attacking the person. Politicians love this one. Both of these are political ads. They love to attack each other as opposed to actually looking at what the policy or what the idea means. Stacking the deck is, I mean, in some ways we have to do this when we're being persuasive, but it's when we only think that we construct our argument as though there's only one side to the argument. We ignore any of the other sides. So we only include evidence that's supporting ours, and we hide or ignore evidence that's against our opinion. To be really persuasive, you have to acknowledge those opinions, as we're going to talk about in our counter-argument section of this unit. We want to be able to respond to them. We don't want to pretend they don't exist. We know they exist. We want to be able to be persuasive in spite of them. So we don't want to do that. So in addition to those pathos-based fallacies, ethos-based fallacies, we also have logos-based fallacies. And these are problems with the logic of our argument. Oftentimes the claims or the proof is invalid, insufficient, disconnected. They might seem reasonable on the surface, but when you dig a little deeper, they're not adequate. So we want to avoid these in our own writing. Be really cognizant when other people are using them in their rhetoric. So one of these is a hasty generalization. A hasty generalization is an inference drawn from insufficient evidence. You can think of a stereotype would be a hasty generalization. We don't have enough evidence to make the conclusion that's being proven. I like to think of the example if you went to class on the first day. You guys are college students, so this might apply to you. And you sit through that class and you're like, oh, this class is horrible, I'm going to withdraw from it. And you go and do it. Could be a hasty generalization in some ways. You don't have a lot of data, right? The first day of class is always kind of boring. We have to go over the syllabus, introduce ourselves, get all that kind of basic boring stuff out of the way. So generally we want to build a little bit more evidence before we take a step. Same thing with our logic. We don't want to make a generalization based on insufficient evidence. Another one is false causes. And in other places you might see this fallacy called post hoc ergo propter hoc, which means after this, therefore because of this. And what that means is that just because one thing happens after another thing doesn't mean that one thing caused another thing. You might also, if you have taken statistics, have heard correlation doesn't mean causation. So if we have, I like this, the most interesting man in the world, the idea is that just because he's surrounded by all these people, these beautiful women and friends after drinking the beer, doesn't mean that the beer caused him to become more interesting or anything like that. Could be unrelated. Politicians like to do that, right? The economy is terrible now that so-and-so has taken over. Maybe could not be correlated. Could have other outside factors, right? I also like to use the example, I saw it one time with something like serial killer eat McDonald's before he went out and killed his victim, so therefore McDonald's must make you a serial killer. We can all see how ridiculous that is, right? So we don't want to attribute false causes. Make sure that something that happened next to each other or before each other doesn't mean it caused it. Begging the question is another one that people misuse this term a lot. But begging the question is assuming that something is true in the claim that you're saying. So it's kind of like circular reasoning is maybe another way to think about that. I like this one. Identity matters. We need to make sure your ID and your boarding pass match. But, I mean, that's basically why you have to show ID, right? It's answering the question. Think fresh, fresh choice restaurant, assuming that it's fresh without actually offering any proof to demonstrate that. So when we beg the question, you're using like a circular argument. You're not actually demonstrating or proving the thing that you're trying to demonstrate. A straw man is a really common one that I see in student essays. And this is one that is easy to do when you're acknowledging counter-argument in an essay. So straw man is when we're acknowledging the other side, but we make their other side seem really stupid or really awful or really insufficient, and then we knock it down. So I like this one. The belief that atheism, the belief that there was nothing happened to nothing, and then nothing magically exploded for no reason, creating everything, and then a bunch of everything magically rearranged itself for no reason whatsoever into self-replicating bits, which then turned into dinosaurs. that's actually not what atheists believe. It's probably, if anyone is an atheist who's listening to this, it probably feels like a bit of an attack. It's a misrepresentation of factual argument. We absolutely do not want to do that when we're presenting counter-argument. We want to be really fair and clear about what it is the other side believes. It's easy to knock down something that's stupid. It's much more challenging and much more impressive to be able to respond to something that makes more sense. Another one is a red herring. Basically, that's like if anyone reads mystery novels, red herring's like a fake clue, or it's something like to distract you, get you off the scent. It's an irrelevant bit or detail that takes away from the overall soundness of the idea. And finally, the last fallacy I want to talk about is faulty analogy. This is where we compare two things that don't really deserve to be compared. Something like this one. We can have moral feelings against homosexuality. Can we have it against murder? Can we have it against other things? I think most of us would agree that it's a pretty far step from taking someone's life to, I don't know, different types of relationships, right? So it's a problematic analogy. Or, if this is formula, this car, then this is breast milk. Of course, breast milk and formula and cars have really nothing in common, so we want to be careful how we do that. So in conclusion, the most persuasive writers are going to avoid fallacies in their own arguments. You definitely want to do it in your own writing. You can refine that in counter-argument. You point out that there's a logical fallacy there. But more importantly, I think as citizens, be aware of what advertisements are telling you. Politicians are full of logical fallacies, political rhetoric. Be aware of what those things are and what the problem is with them, because it'll make you a more informed citizen and more able to respond to the many demands on you in society. So in conclusion, I hope this helps you as you start to construct your own persuasive argument, building really strong persuasive positions, and being able to point out these kind of problems in other people's writings as you continue.